Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you thought you knew about love, everything you were taught, everything you absorbed from stories, movies, family, friends, wasn't just incomplete, but deliberately shaped to keep you from questioning it. Imagine discovering that from the moment you took your first breath, the culture, the language, and even the quiet examples you saw around you were carefully constructing an idea in your mind, one that felt so natural you never even thought to doubt it. You didn't stumble into this idea by accident. You walked into it willingly, even proudly, believing it was the ultimate truth, the prize worth striving for, the anchor of your existence. You embraced it with your eyes wide open, and yet you didn't see what it really was, not because you were foolish, but because it was designed so you would never look beyond its surface. What you believed to be a sacred, unchanging bond was in fact a mechanism, cold, silent, invisible, built long before you existed, perfected over generations, and woven so deeply into human behavior that it operates whether you see it or not. You were told it was passion. You were told it was destiny. You were told it was a force beyond logic, something that chooses you as much as you choose it. But the truth, the one that almost no one dares to speak, is far more unsettling. What binds you may not be passion at all. It may not be romance, or some divine plan, or the poetic spark that you've been taught to chase. What binds you could simply be instinct, not yours, but someone else's. And that instinct is not concerned with your happiness. It doesn't care how deeply you love, how much you sacrifice, or how sincerely you commit. Its priority is not your joy, it is your usefulness. As long as you serve its purpose, you will feel needed, wanted, even irreplaceable. But the day you stop serving that purpose, the change will be quiet and merciless. There will be no debate, no warning, no heartfelt conversation to prepare you for the shift. You will simply stop being necessary. And when that moment comes, the transformation in the other person will be as swift as it is final. The one who once swore you were their soulmate, who promised to love you until the end, will be the same one who steps over the wreckage of what you shared without a second thought, not because they are cruel, not because they set out to betray you, but because biology has no room for sentimentality when it decides its course. Schopenhauer understood this long before evolutionary science caught up, speaking with a level of bluntness that still unsettles people today. He recognized that female nature was not engineered to love in the way men imagine love to be. It was designed to select, to filter, to choose what maximizes survival and advantage in the present moment. That selection is not about finding the best man in some universal, timeless sense. It is about finding the most useful man right now, in this particular phase of life. And as soon as circumstances change, as soon as you are no longer that man, the role you once held begins to vanish. This process has a name now. Modern evolutionary psychology calls it hypergamy, but giving it a scientific label doesn't make it softer, doesn't make it less ruthless. This is an instinct as ancient as human life itself, as unstoppable as a fire-consuming wood. You can't reason with it, because it doesn't operate within reason. You can't appeal to morality, because it is not governed by morality. You can't negotiate with it, because it doesn't understand agreements. And the most dangerous part of all is that it doesn't even require conscious awareness. A woman doesn't need to plan it, to think about it, to scheme in order for it to guide her behavior. It moves beneath thought, beneath language, shaping choices without announcing itself. It has always been there, moving unseen, long before you were born, long before any of us had the words to describe it. Meanwhile, you walk through life interpreting these signals as romance, as a story worth writing in your own blood. You confuse instinct with passion, biology with poetry, desire with permanence. You tell yourself you've found the one, you build your dreams around this illusion, and you hold on as though it were unshakable. But this is not a fairy tale, and there are no guaranteed happy endings here, only the anesthetic stories we tell ourselves to make the pain bearable. What you've been living is not unconditional love. It is a conditional arrangement, dressed up in the language of eternity. And that's the truth most people are never ready to hear. The most dangerous part is not the day she leaves. It is the long, silent stretch before that, when she's still there beside you, smiling, laughing, talking, making plans, but withdrawing something far more vital than her presence. Her emotional investment. This is the kind of abandonment that doesn't happen in one dramatic moment. It happens gradually, invisibly, while you convince yourself nothing has changed. She is still in the room, but her instinct has already begun recalculating routes, exploring alternatives, weighing her options. This is not conscious strategy. It is the quiet, automatic process of nature running its program, testing whether you are still the best choice. And here lies the truth no one wants to accept. The selection process never ends. There is no moment of ultimate safety, no point where you can finally say, "She's chosen me, and now I'm secure." That security is only the calm before the next measurement. This is not paranoia. It is biology. The same force that first drew her to you will, without fail, continue to test you to ensure that the man she sees today is still the man worth keeping tomorrow. These are not calculated games or manipulative traps. They are ancient impulses refined over millions of years, designed to detect weakness before it becomes a threat to survival. And they manifest in ways so small you barely notice them. An offhand comment, a subtle shift in tone, a comparison you didn't expect. Without realizing it, you've been entered into an exam you didn't sign up for, an exam with no set schedule, no warnings, and no end date. The results are not determined by what you say in the moment, but by what you project consistently. And most men, tragically, fail not because they aren't capable, but because they misinterpret these tests entirely. They take them personally. They respond with defensiveness, with over-explanation, or with desperate attempts to please. And in doing so, they unwittingly send the one signal instinct cannot ignore, that the value she once saw in them has begun to fade. Once that seed of doubt is planted in instinct's soil, the outcome is no longer a question of if, but when. The tragedy is that most men, when faced with these subtle but relentless tests, interpret them through the wrong lens. They believe they are being attacked, disrespected, or challenged unfairly. They take it personally, as if each comment or shift in tone were meant to wound them, and they react from a place of insecurity. They defend themselves too eagerly, they explain themselves too much, they rush to smooth over tension in an effort to preserve harmony. Others go further into desperate compliance, changing their behavior, suppressing their own needs, adjusting every action in hopes of regaining approval. What they don't see is that this very response is the final proof instinct has been searching for. The moment you abandon the man you were when she first desired you, the man who was self-contained, unshaken, and moved from his own center, you confirm to her biology that your value is no longer what it once was. And once that confirmation settles in, the erosion of the bond begins. It is not a dramatic rupture, but a slow, irreversible process. The foundation starts to rot, and no amount of pleading, proving, or posturing can restore it. Schopenhauer understood this before evolutionary psychology had the language to explain it. To him, love was a necessary illusion, a trick of nature to keep men invested in a process they cannot control. He saw through the romantic narratives that men cling to, recognizing them as tools of a deeper biological agenda. What science later labeled hypergamy, what psychology now studies in clinical terms, he identified as the constant recalibration of choice, a process that does not stop once you are chosen. Your position is never fixed. You are in a perpetual state of evaluation, and this truth dismantles the false comfort that so many men build their lives upon. Decline in value is rarely signaled with a loud declaration. It shows itself in hundreds of microscopic ways, a glance that lingers a fraction less than before, a laugh that feels slightly delayed, as though it had to be forced into existence, a question that is no longer about curiosity, but about gauging your reaction. Each of these is a signal being logged and assessed by instinct. By the time you notice these changes, if you even do, the process of emotional detachment is already well underway. And to her biology, replacing you is not betrayal, it is maintenance. It is an adjustment to ensure her future is aligned with what her instincts demand. So, the question becomes unavoidable. If the selection process is infinite, Is there a way to exist within it without being consumed by it? The answer is never found in convincing someone of your worth over and over. That path is a slow form of self-destruction, because it places your power in the hands of something you can't control. It ties your sense of worth to a source that is not yours to command. The only path forward is to flip the dynamic entirely, to stop being the one who is endlessly evaluated and become the one who evaluates. This is not about arrogance or playing games. It is about psychological survival. When you stand in your own authority, when you set your own criteria, when you decide what is worth your time and energy, something fundamental changes. You are no longer moving from fear of loss, you are moving from alignment with yourself. And here is where the paradox emerges. The very moment you begin living in a way that is no longer centered on maintaining approval is the moment your real value rises in both your own eyes and in the eyes of others. Schopenhauer might have described this as reclaiming the sovereignty of the self. In modern terms, it is about re-establishing yourself as the central figure in your own life, not a supporting character in someone else's. The female instinct, though it cannot be reasoned with, responds in a way that seems contradictory. It is drawn not to the man who has perfected himself for her approval, but to the man who cannot be fully possessed. This doesn't mean being careless or detached for the sake of appearance. It means building a life and an identity that are complete, without constant emotional reinforcement from a single source. When a man lives this way, he projects something no social conditioning can fake. The sense that, even if he is lost to someone, he will continue moving forward without hesitation. In the ancient language of instinct, this is what high value truly means. It's not about being flawless, endlessly charming, or permanently dominant. It's about independence so deep that your emotional survival does not hinge on one person's validation. But to get here, you have to break an addiction stronger than most vices, the need for approval. This is where the vast majority of men sabotage themselves. They think they are building intimacy, but in reality they are living under a constant state of evaluation, shaping their words and actions every day as if every interaction is a test they must pass to keep their place. This posture, aside from exhausting the man, erodes the very dynamic that fuels attraction. Because attraction does not thrive on certainty, it thrives on tension, unpredictability, and the possibility of loss. When you become predictable, you stop being a challenge. You stop being a source of instinctual engagement and instead become part of the background, a piece of furniture in the familiar room of her life. Evolutionary psychology points to a truth many ignore. Attraction is not a static condition. It is fluid, shifting, contingent on the perception of ongoing competence and potential. The man who locks himself into the comfort of a relationship and ceases to grow, ceases to improve, is unknowingly placing himself in line for replacement. Not out of cruelty, but because instinct is designed to detect stagnation and seek out prospects that signal a stronger future. In this light, what we often call a breakup is nothing more than a natural transaction in an unspoken market, a realignment of value where biology quietly seeks the next advantageous option. Stopping the idealization of love is not cynicism, it is the refusal to build the foundations of your existence on land you do not own. It is the recognition that no matter how intoxicating the emotion, how magnetic the connection, or how poetic the promises, you cannot anchor your identity in something that exists beyond your control. A man who understands this truth ceases to beg for permanence, like a starving animal clawing for scraps. Instead, he begins to invest in himself relentlessly, not as a bargaining chip to keep someone from leaving, but because his life demands growth and expansion. He stops seeing love as a lifeboat and starts seeing himself as the captain of his own ship. And in that movement, something ancient awakens in his instincts. He stops radiating the desperation of a man clinging to the edge and starts carrying the energy of a man who can walk away at any moment without hesitation. That subtle shift is not just psychological, it is biological. Nature itself respects the man who is prepared to lose, because he no longer fears loss. But this is where many men fall into a new and more subtle danger, the danger of internal erosion. You can remove the visible chains, yet still be bound by invisible ones. Outward independence without inward independence is an illusion, a mask worn to hide the same old dependencies. Many men dress themselves in the appearance of strength but are still deeply addicted to external recognition. They may not be chasing permanence with a partner anymore, but they are still chasing applause, approval, or validation from the crowd. And in doing so, they remain just as vulnerable to manipulation as they ever were. Schopenhauer warned us long ago the most dangerous form of manipulation is not what others do to you, but what your own unresolved emotional deficiencies drive you to do to yourself. When those deficiencies remain unaddressed, you become a willing accomplice in your own imprisonment, unconsciously gravitating towards situations that reaffirm your hidden insecurities. You replay the same wounds in different relationships, the same betrayals in different faces, all because your inner story demands a familiar ending. To truly break the cycle, you must cut at the root. You must identify and sever everything, every habit, every attachment, every craving that feeds your dependency. This is not arrogance, nor is it bitterness. It is survival. It requires enduring long stretches of discomfort, learning to exist without approval, walking through what feels like an endless emotional desert with no map and no promises. But in that desert, something miraculous happens. The hunger fades, the thirst for validation dries up, and what replaces it is immunity, the kind of immunity that makes you untouchable to emotional manipulation. Once you have endured the absence, the presence of others becomes a choice, not a necessity. When you stop fearing the void, you begin to see the world with unclouded eyes. You realize that most people, whether they admit it or not, are in a desperate, lifelong struggle to fill that void. They reach for people, for possessions, for distractions, not out of love or joy, but out of fear of being alone with themselves. That desperation makes them predictable, and predictability is the easiest thing in the world to control. But the man who learns to see solitude not as emptiness, but as space for reconstruction, becomes unpredictable, uncontrollable. He no longer moves from need, but from choice. And in the game of attraction, choice is the ultimate weapon. Need is the crack in the armor. Choice is the steel that makes you untouchable. The selection process in life never truly ends. People will come and go, alliances will shift, doors will open and close. But once you stop fearing the moment you might be discarded, you change the entire dynamic. You no longer fight for a seat at the table. You decide whether the table is worth sitting at in the first place. This is the real transformation, not from loser to winner, not from outsider to insider, but from participant to free player. The man who plays because he chooses to, not because he must, is the man who can never be cornered. And yet, true independence will not make you universally adored. In fact, it will provoke discomfort. Some will envy it, others will resent it, because your freedom serves as a mirror to their chains. It forces them to confront the truth they've been avoiding, that their security is an illusion, that their attachments are fragile, that their identities are borrowed. This is not something you need to fix for them, nor something you should apologize for. It is your filter. Those who cannot accept your freedom do not deserve your time, your energy, or your loyalty. Schopenhauer's warning was never a call to hatred, it was a call to clarity. His message was not to despise female nature or human nature in general, but to strip away the romanticized illusions and see reality for what it is, a force of nature, unyielding and indifferent to your fantasies. And such a force is not met with fairy tales, but with the grounded strength of a man who knows his worth, fears no loss, and refuses to negotiate his identity. The path forward is simple in theory, but brutal in execution. Stop asking how to keep someone and start asking whether they are worth keeping in the first place. Change the question, and you change the rules. Change the rules, and you change your life entirely.